Snow lashes across the Idaho mountains, carving shadows through the storm. Inside a battered storm shelter, a German shepherd named Kaiser plants himself between two frail seniors and the danger crawling closer through the whiteout. Outside, footsteps crunch, a gun clicks, and a voice, cold, familiar, whispers the promise of a night that was never meant to end gently. But this time, something shifts. A rescue worker's flare glows like a trembling star. A forgotten crate buried under ice hides a secret men would kill to protect. And Ethan Cole, a man who thought he'd lost his purpose, steps into the storm not as a witness, but as the barrier between life and the unthinkable. In the next moments, alliances will break, mercy will rise in the unlikeliest hearts, and one dog's instinct will change the course of 3 lives forever. If you listen closely, you may even hear it, the softest whisper of a miracle in the snow. Before we begin, tell me where you were watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no life, young or old, should face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who still needs hope. Winter had locked itself across Redwood Pass, a narrow mountain corridor rising above the outskirts of Boise, Idaho. A fresh storm had rolled in from the north, piling snow onto the highway until the asphalt vanished beneath a white sheet. Wind pushed through the itters in long, uneven gusts, rattling branches and shaking loose clouds of powder that drifted like smoke. Temperatures had dropped 20 degrees in 3 hours. The storm advisory was already at the highest level. A lone pickup truck crawled up the slope, its headlights cutting a narrow path through the gray chaos. Inside, the heater ran at full strength, but the cold still crept in at the edges. Ethan Cole, 39, kept both hands on the wheel, jaw tight, eyes steady. He wasn't the kind of man who talked much during long drives, even when the road was clear, but tonight the silence seemed heavier than usual. Ethan had a solid build, broad shoulders, square frame, hands rough from years of rescue work. His dark hair was kept short, a practical habit left over from his days in the Idaho Mountain Search and Rescue Team. A faint streak of gray along his right temple stood out against the darkness, giving him a hardened, weathered look. His beard was trimmed close, though the outline of his jaw still showed the angles of someone who once lived on adrenaline and routine. His eyes, pale blue, steady, rarely stopped moving. Even on an empty road, he scanned for hazards the way some men checked mirrors. After an avalanche took the life of his closest teammate 2 years earlier, Ethan left the rescue unit. People told him he had done the right thing, that no one could have saved the man, that the mountain had chosen its own victim. Logic never reached him. He replayed the moment almost every night, the wall of snow collapsing, the roar, the way his partner's voice cut off mid-shout. Guilt had settled into him like a cold that refused to thaw. Since then, long, solitary drives through empty places were the only thing that kept him calm. In the passenger seat sat Kaiser, a 7-year-old German shepherd. The dog had a thick black and tan coat, muscular shoulders, and posture that resembled a soldier standing guard. His ears were always upright unless he slept, and his amber eyes seemed to read more than they revealed. Kaiser carried a thin scar across his left flank, a souvenir from a rockslide rescue years ago. Ethan trusted that dog more than anyone alive. Kaiser had no hesitation, no doubt, no ghosts. He simply acted. A violent gust slammed against the truck, pushing it a few inches toward the shoulder. Ethan steadied the wheel. "Road's worse than I expected," he muttered. Kaiser shifted, planting his front paws firmly on the rubber mat. A light growl rumbled in his throat. Not fear, more like acknowledgement. Snow thickened until visibility dropped to less than 40 feet. The wiper struggled to clear the glass fast enough. Ethan leaned forward, squinting, following the whirl. Faint curve of the road he knew only from memory. Redwood Pass wasn't dangerous under normal conditions, but storms like this turned it into a corridor of blind corners and ice patches. The valley below was buried in white. A few cabin lights flickered faintly through the storm, lonely dots swallowed by the wind. Ethan didn't know why he came up here tonight. Maybe because quiet places still felt safer than crowded ones. Maybe because motion kept his mind from drifting back to the avalanche. The truck climbed another bend. That was when Ethan noticed it. Something faint in his peripheral vision, a dull golden pulse between the trees. He frowned. "You see that?" Kaiser sat up straighter, his ears turned sharply toward the right side of the road. His body stiffened, muscles tightening under his coat. The light appeared again, a small, steady glow, low to the ground, too warm to be a reflection. Ethan slowed to a crawl. A lantern? Out here? The Park Service shut down all observation posts weeks ago. No hiker would be foolish enough to camp in a storm this size. And if it were a ranger, they would be using LED lights, not something that flickered like flame. Ethan pulled the truck onto a narrow turnout and killed the engine. The silence that followed was unsettling. Even the wind outside felt distant compared to the hum of the truck. He grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. The cold hit instantly, sharp, dry, biting. Kaiser jumped down to beside him, paws sinking deep into the snow. The dog lowered his head and sniffed, tail rigid. "Easy," Ethan whispered, though he tightened his grip on the flashlight. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved toward the tree line. Each step was deliberate. Ethan swept the beam of light across the ground, looking for movement, tracks, anything unusual. The storm muted most sounds, but he could still hear the faint whistle of wind through cedar branches. The glow brightened as they approached. It came from an old brass lantern hanging from a low cedar branch. Snow clung to the metal frame. The glass cracked near one corner, yet the flame inside burned with surprising strength, sheltered somehow from the wind. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with weather. He raised the flashlight to examine the area around the tree. Snow near the base looked disturbed, compressed, dragged, as if something heavy had shifted or been pulled. He stepped closer and brushed away the surface layer. Beneath it, he saw the shape of a heel impression, then another. Boot prints, 2 sets, big enough to belong to adult men. Kaiser growled softly, head fixed toward the deeper forest. Ethan scanned the trees. Nothing moved. He shifted the flashlight upward and stopped. Just several yards beyond the lantern, nearly blending into the storm, hung 2 human shapes. Suspended from the lower cedar branches by thick ropes, the bodies swayed slightly in the wind. Snow had gathered on their shoulders, in their hair, along the wrinkles of their clothes. Ethan's breath stalled. He moved quickly, pushing through the heavy snow until he stood below them. They were elderly, a man and a woman, both bundled in winter coats that were now damp and icy. The man was thin, wiry, his face lined with age and cold. He had a neatly trimmed white beard, now frozen into stiff angles. His hands were purple where the rope had cut into the skin. The woman beside him had a rounder face, softer features, silver hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her lips were pale, skin waxy from exposure. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. A faint pulse. Slow, weak. He checked the woman. Another pulse, even weaker. "They're alive," he said quietly. Kaiser circled once, sniffing the ground. The dog stopped at a patch of disturbed snow, then followed the line of footprints that disappeared into the trees. His body stiffened, ears pulled forward, tail straight. Whoever did this had left recently. Ethan swallowed hard. He forced himself to think like a rescuer again. "All right," he whispered. "We're getting them down." He reached for the knife clipped to his belt, the familiar weight bringing back habits he thought he had abandoned. The rope was thick and cold, but he cut through the first line steadily, keeping one arm beneath the man's back to control the drop. The body sagged heavily into his arms, far heavier than Ethan expected for a man so thin. He lowered him gently into the snow. Kaiser immediately moved closer, standing guard. Ethan turned to the woman. He cut the rope carefully. She fell softly into his arms, her body limp, her breathing shallow. The lantern above swayed in the wind, casting a dim circle of gold over the snow. Ethan looked at the 2 strangers lying unconscious at his feet, then at the footprints leading deeper into the forest. Someone had done this deliberately, someone who might still be nearby. He felt the weight of that thought settle heavily on his shoulders. "Come on, buddy," he said to Kaiser. "We can figure out the rest later." With the storm tightening and darkness closing in, Ethan Cole began the rescue he never planned to make, one that would lead him into dangers he had tried to leave behind. Ethan shifted his weight, adjusting the unconscious woman in his arms as the wind pushed harder across Redwood Pass. The storm had grown heavier in the short minutes since he cut the ropes, and he knew staying exposed would kill all of them. Kaiser stood near the old man, tail stiff, scanning the trees with sharp, restless movements. Snow swirled around them like drifting ash, making visibility shrink to 20 feet at most. Ethan had to move fast. He knelt beside the man again, checking his pulse once more. Slow, fading, but still present. "We don't have long," he muttered. Kaiser answered with a firm, short bark, as if urging him to hurry. The dog nudged the man's shoulder with his nose, then looked at Ethan. It wasn't panic, it was insistence. Ethan scanned the tree line for options. The truck was too far, and climbing uphill with two unconscious bodies was impossible. He needed shelter, something close. He recalled a decommissioned fire watch cabin, somewhere south of this trail, maybe a quarter-mile downslope. He had stayed there years ago during a training exercise. It wasn't much, rotting boards, broken windows, but it had 4 walls and a roof, which was enough to buy time. "Come on," he said firmly. "We're heading south." He lifted the woman into his arms carefully. She was light, far lighter than expected, her bones fragile beneath the padded coat. The old man, he would have to drag or carry later. Ethan lowered the woman to the snow for a brief moment, then hoisted the man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. His muscles strained, but he didn't falter. Years of rescue work had taught him how to move injured bodies in deep snow. Kaiser stayed beside the woman, pushing his body against her side to keep her from rolling downhill. "Good boy. Stay with her," Ethan said. He carried the old man first, staggering through knee-deep snow. Each step felt like lifting through mud. The wind clawed at him, pulling heat from his face until it stung. He reached a small clearing and eased the man down against the trunk of a wide cedar. Kaiser brought the woman next, nudging at her boots until Ethan returned to carry her as well. Once both were gathered beneath the cedar, Ethan paused, catching his breath. Snow drifted down through the branches in soft bursts. The woman's breathing was uneven, shallow. The man's was barely audible. He needed warmth, soon. "Kaiser," Ethan whispered, "find the path." The shepherd lowered his head and sniffed the air, then padded southeast through the snow with steady determination. Ethan lifted the man again and followed. The dog led them along a narrow slope where the trees grew denser, offering some shelter from the storm. After several minutes of trudging, Kaiser stopped at a drop in the terrain, a shallow depression filled with wind-blown snow. Beyond it, half hidden by a cluster of pines, stood the cabin Ethan remembered. It was worse than he expected. The roof sagged along one edge. One of the window frames hung crooked, its glass shattered. Snow piled up against the walls and seeped in through cracks. A rusted stovepipe poked through the roof, leaning like it might snap under another inch of snow. Even in this state, the structure looked like salvation. Ethan approached quickly, boots sinking with each step. He kicked snow away from the door and forced it open with his shoulder. The hinges squealed in protest. Inside was dim and cold, with the smell of old wood and dust. A broken cot lay in one corner, and the remnants of a long-dead fire, charcoal and brittle ash, sat in the rusted stove. Not great, but better than the forest floor. He returned outside immediately and carried the old man into the cabin, laying him on the remaining half of the cot. Then he retrieved the woman, placing her next to him and covering both with his own jacket until he found a better option. Kaiser followed close, shaking snow off his coat in a rough spray. Inside, Ethan closed the door to block the wind. Darkness settled heavier than before. He turned on his flashlight and scanned the room. A few wooden crates sat stacked against a wall. In one crate, he found scraps of old canvas and a moth-eaten blanket. He shook the blanket free of dust and wrapped it around the couple. He then layered the canvas above it to trap whatever warmth their bodies could generate. Kaiser stood guard at the door, occasionally sniffing the crack beneath it. The dog's posture remained tense, not panicked, but alert. Ethan crouched beside the couple again, studying their faces in the flashlight glow. Up close, he noted more details. The man had stern features softened by age, deep lines running from nose to mouth, a strong jaw now slack, skin pale under the frostbite. His eyebrows, thick and white, contrasted sharply against the bruised skin around his eyes. The woman had round cheeks and fine wrinkles along her temples, the kind formed by decades of smiling. Her silver hair had curled against the frost, giving her an almost fragile halo. These were not hikers. These were not people who wandered into storms by mistake. Something had driven them out here. Ethan checked their wrists. Deep rope marks circled both arms. Not accidental. Someone tied them up intentionally. Someone left them to die. He moved to Kaiser, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. The shepherd stood rigid, ears high. "You smell something?" Ethan asked quietly. Kaiser's eyes didn't leave the door. That confirmed it. They were not alone up here. The cabin trembled as a gust slammed into the roof. Snow shook loose from overhead. Ethan looked around for anything to reinforce the walls. He found a broken chair and kicked its legs loose. He wedged 2 lengths of wood against the door from the inside to keep it from blowing open. Then he returned to the stove. He opened the rusted iron door. Some old charcoal crumbs still clung to the bottom. With enough heat, they might catch. Again. He searched the crates and found a thin strip of fire starter, probably left behind by a hunter long ago. He took a piece of crate wood, broke it into smaller splinters, and arranged it inside the stove. He struck a match. A small flame flickered, then grew when he added more splinters. Soon a weak fire crackled, radiating faint warmth. It wasn't much, but enough to push back the cold. Ethan kept feeding it wood until the temperature inside rose a little. The couple stirred slightly. The woman's hand twitched. The man's breathing deepened by an inch. Good. They weren't gone yet. Kaiser suddenly growled, quiet but firm. Something moved outside, crunching snow, slow, heavy. Ethan turned off his flashlight instantly. Silence filled the cabin, except for the soft crackle of the stove. More footsteps, not an animal. Too rhythmic. Ethan crouched beside Kaiser, the dog's muscles coiled, ready to strike or defend. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin wall, not at the door, at the window. Ethan's heart pounded once, hard. A shadow moved across the slanted frame of broken glass, just a smear of darkness against stormlight. The shape was tall, human. Then it shifted away, swallowed by the storm again. Kaiser stood stiff as stone, gaze locked on the window, his teeth bared slightly, not in fear, but readiness. Ethan didn't breathe until the crunching faded. He waited another full minute before exhaling. Whoever had tied the couple to the tree wasn't far. And now they knew someone intervened. He checked the couple again. Both breaths were faint but steady. That was enough for now. "We're staying quiet until morning," Ethan whispered. Kaiser lowered his head but didn't relax. Ethan positioned himself between the door and the couple, placing one hand on Kaiser's shoulder to keep the dog steady. The fire glowed dimly, casting shaky light over the old wooden walls. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the danger had taken shape. And Ethan knew, whatever happened next, he couldn't let these strangers die the way his teammate had. Not again. The storm eased slightly near dawn, settling into a steady fall of light flakes that drifted through the cracks of the old cabin roof. Inside, the temperature had risen just enough for the air to lose its bite, though cold still clung to the corners of the room. The small fire Ethan fed through the night glowed weakly inside the rusted stove, casting soft amber light across the worn wooden walls. Ethan sat with his back against the far corner, legs stretched out, one hand resting on Kaiser's neck. The dog hadn't slept at all. He had remained in a half-ready crouch through the long hours, ears twitching at every sound outside. The old couple lay on the cot beneath layers of blanket and canvas. Their breathing had steadied, though their faces remained pale from exposure. Ethan checked each pulse as quietly as possible. Both were still faint but consistent, better than he expected after the night they endured. He stood and stretched, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness from hours of stillness. Kaiser followed his movements with alert eyes, tail motionless. "We need more fuel," Ethan whispered. The fire wouldn't last another hour without more wood. He didn't like leaving, not with the shadow he had seen at the window, but if the fire died, the couple wouldn't make it. Kaiser nudged his leg, then turned toward the door as if offering to accompany him. Ethan shook his head and pointed toward the couple. "Stay. Guard them." He knew the dog would obey. Years of training had wired obedience into Kaiser's bones. Ethan eased the door open slowly, stopping when the hinge creaked too loudly. The outside was quiet, an unnerving quiet, heavy enough that he paused before stepping out. Snow covered the ground in a fresh layer, smoothing over the tracks that belonged to the shadow he saw hours earlier. Whatever had been near them last night either moved on or waited somewhere deeper in the woods. Ethan stepped outside and closed the door gently behind him. The morning light was faint, a muted gray filtering through thousands of tall pines. Cold air hit his face hard, but it was manageable. He scanned the forest carefully before moving toward a cluster of fallen branches a few yards from the cabin. Most of the wood was soaked, but he knew how to pick the dry pieces from under thick limbs. He collected several armfuls of narrow branches and broken trunk pieces, stacking them beside the cabin entrance. As he reached down for one last log, something caught his eye, a partially buried object near the base of a pine tree. He brushed snow from it and found a canteen made of dark aluminum, scratched and dented, military grade, not something hikers usually carry. The initials RD were faintly engraved near the lid. Ethan turned it in his hand, jaw tightening. Whoever RD was, he had been nearby recently. The canteen wasn't frozen, which meant it hadn't been there long. He slipped it into his jacket and returned to the cabin. Inside, Kaiser met him with a low rumble, not a threat, an alert. Ethan placed the firewood near the stove and approached the dog, lowering his voice. "What is it?" Kaiser stepped to the door, nose pressed near the bottom edge, tail straight. Ethan listened. At first he heard nothing but the whistle of wind pressing against the walls. Then faintly, from far down the slope, he heard the crunch of something heavy moving across snow. Ethan motioned for Kaiser to stay and cracked the door open just enough to look outside. Trees shifted in the wind. Snow drifted sideways. Nothing else. But after a few seconds, a figure appeared between the trees. A man moving uphill through waist-deep snow, pushing through the storm with slow strength. Ethan closed the door quickly but quietly and leaned against it, heart picking up. He whispered under his breath, "Someone's coming." Kaiser's eyes sharpened. The footsteps outside grew closer until they stopped right outside the cabin. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps themselves. Ethan lowered his stance and waited. A fist pounded once on the door, slow, deliberate. "Hello?" a voice called out, deep and gravelly, trying for friendly, but landing somewhere closer to uneasy. "Anybody in there?" Ethan didn't answer. The knock came again, 2 times, louder. "Storm took my camp," the voice continued. "I'm freezing out here, looking for shelter." Ethan glanced at Kaiser. The dog's lip twitched in a silent snarl. Dogs didn't distrust for no reason. Ethan stood to the side of the door, out of the direct view. "Who are you?" he called out. A pause. The man cleared his throat. "Name's Caleb Boone. I was hunting further down the ridge. Got stuck when the storm rolled in." The name meant nothing. Ethan kept the door closed. "You alone?" Another hesitation. "Yeah, just me." The tone sounded too practiced, too measured. Ethan cracked the door open just a few inches, enough to see the man's lower body. Heavy winter boots covered in snow, dark pants, thick and insulated. No visible weapon, but hunters could hide rifles easily. Ethan opened the door another inch, lifting his flashlight to illuminate the man's face. Caleb Boone stood nearly 6 feet tall, lean, but strong in the way mountain men often were. His beard was dark brown mixed with gray, trimmed unevenly around his jaw. Snow clung to his eyelashes and eyebrows. His skin was weathered, the kind that had seen too many winters. His nose had a slight bend to one side, as though broken years before. His eyes were a muddy hazel, alert but hard to read. He looked cold, exhausted, and tense. But something was off. His clothing was high quality, newer than most hunters wore. His jacket was a tactical gray-down coat with reinforced elbows, almost military grade. Not typical for someone who claimed to hunt downridge, and no snowshoes, strange for anyone traveling this far in deep snow. Ethan kept his tone guarded. "Storm's rough, but I can't let strangers inside with people injured." Caleb's expression shifted slightly, sympathy mixed with quick calculation. "Injured? You have others with you?" His head tilted a fraction, too subtle for a casual question. Ethan regretted the slip. "Not your concern." Caleb raised both hands slowly. "Look, man, freezing isn't my plan for the day. I just need 10 minutes near a fire, then I'll move on." Kaiser stepped past Ethan and stared through the crack at Caleb, body rigid. Caleb's gaze flicked down, narrowing. Dogs were good judges of character. Caleb seemed to realize that immediately. Ethan didn't open the door any further. "I can't help you. Move on." Caleb's jaw flexed. For a moment, the friendly tone dropped from his voice. "You sure about that?" His stare sharpened. "Storm's not easing soon. Roads will be closed. People die up here." "I'm aware." Ethan shut the door firmly and slid the wooden brace back into place. Kaiser growled low as footsteps shifted outside. Caleb didn't knock again, but Ethan heard the snow crunch as the man moved away. Then silence. Ethan waited nearly a full minute before stepping to the small window. Through the cracks, he saw Caleb walking away slowly. But the man wasn't heading down the ridge. He was circling left, deeper into the woods. Not good. Ethan looked at Kaiser. "He's not done. Be ready." The dog pressed closer to him, tail stiff. A soft voice rose from the cot. The woman, still weak, had woken. "Where are we?" she whispered. Ethan turned and kneeled beside her. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing pale, confused eyes. "You're safe for now," he said quietly. "I found you in the woods." The old man stirred too, groaning faintly. Ethan checked both pulses again. Still steady. "Do you remember what happened?" Ethan asked. The woman blinked slowly, trying to gather fragments of memory. "There were 2 men, One younger, one older. They took our bag, said there wasn't enough. Then, her voice broke into a small breath. They tied us up. Ethan swallowed. He wanted details, but pushing now would drain the little strength they had. He stepped back and sat beside Kaiser again, listening for any sign Caleb had returned, but the storm buried most sounds. Light filtered weakly from the window. The fire crackled gently. The couple drifted back to shallow sleep. Ethan forced himself to stay awake. He knew Caleb Boone wasn't a simple hunter lost in a storm. He also knew the people who tied the couple to a cedar tree had to be close. And if Caleb was with them, or scouting for them, then time was running out. He rested a hand on Kaiser's back and whispered, "Stay sharp. We're not alone on this mountain." The fire inside the cabin had burned low again, though enough warmth lingered for Ethan to feel it on his hands. The storm continued outside, steady but softer than the night before. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the boards, pale and weak. Ethan stayed beside Kaiser, both watching the door as if expecting Caleb Boone to return at any moment. The old couple still slept, though their breathing grew deeper and less strained. A good sign, but the danger outside canceled any comfort. Ethan stood slowly, stretching the tension from his back. Kaiser rose with him, shaking off the stiffness of hours spent alert. Ethan's thoughts returned to the canteen he found. Engraved initials RD. Whoever carried it had been close, likely hunting the cabin as they slept. Caleb's arrival wasn't coincidence. Someone had scouted the area long before Ethan came across the elderly couple, and now Caleb knew Ethan wasn't alone, which made the cabin a target rather than a refuge. He needed a plan before they were boxed in. He went to the window and lifted a torn scrap of tarp just enough to see outside. Most of the forest lay still beneath a fresh blanket of snow. No movement, no footprints, no sign of Caleb Boone. That made things worse. Caleb had circled wide around the cabin, but Ethan didn't know from which direction he might return. Kaiser's ears perked sharply. He stepped closer to the wall opposite the door, nose pressed to a seam between boards. Ethan followed, crouching. At first it sounded like wind scraping branches. Then he caught the rhythm. Soft, deliberate crunching of snow. Someone moving uphill. Ethan motioned for silence. Kaiser froze. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin. This time, no knock. A faint whistle cut through the air. Two short, one long. Ethan's jaw clenched. A signal. Not for him, but for someone else hiding in the woods. He whispered, "We can't stay here." Kaiser looked up, eyes sharp, ready. Ethan moved to the couple. The woman woke first, startled, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her voice cracked softly. "Is someone out there?" "Yes," Ethan said. "We need to get you both somewhere safer." The man stirred too, blinking with confusion, then pain. "They're coming back, aren't they?" His voice was raspy, but clearer than earlier. Ethan didn't lie. "Maybe. We're leaving now." He wrapped a layer of canvas around the woman and adjusted the blanket around the man. Both were weak, but alert. The old man tried to sit up, teeth clenched from the effort. Ethan steadied him. "Let me lift you. Don't strain." Before moving them, Ethan reached into his pack and took out a compact rescue knife. Sturdy, matte black, with a serrated section along the spine. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Something told him he'd need it. He turned to Kaiser. "Search." The dog moved quietly around the cabin, sniffing corners and boards. Then he stopped at the back wall, tail stiff, nose pressed low to the ground. That direction. Behind the cabin lay a narrow slope leading into a cluster of boulders and dense pines. It was also the only direction Caleb didn't approach from earlier, a risky route, but the least predictable. Ethan lifted the old man first, gripping him firmly around the back and under the knees. The man winced but didn't protest. Ethan lowered him to the floor long enough to wrap his legs in strips of torn canvas to keep the snow off. Then he helped the woman stand. She was lighter, but her knees buckled without warning. Kaiser pressed against her hip, propping her up. Ethan whispered, "Lean on him. He's steady." She nodded weakly, one hand gripping Kaiser's collar. Outside, the footsteps resumed, slow, deliberate, circling. No time left. Ethan opened the door just wide enough for Kaiser to slip out first. The dog stepped into the cold, scanned the tree line, and let out a low, controlled bark. Clear road. Ethan helped the woman outside, then returned to carry the old man. Snow stung his face instantly. The trees moaned under the weight of the storm. The sky was a gray slate with no visible horizon. Kaiser moved ahead, guiding them toward the back slope. Ethan followed close behind, carrying the man with steady steps. The old woman walked beside him, leaning heavily on Kaiser. They worked their way down the slope until the cabin disappeared behind a veil of trees. For a few minutes, the forest remained still. Then Kaiser stopped abruptly. His posture stiffened, ears straight, nose pointed toward a line of pines. Ethan turned just in time to hear a branch snap in the distance. Someone was following. "Keep moving," he whispered. They continued deeper through the trees until the forest opened slightly, revealing a narrow ravine, half filled with snow. Ethan knew this route. It led down to a service road used by firefighters and rangers during summer. If they reached it, they could follow it downhill to a highway, or at least put more distance between them and their pursuers. But halfway down the ravine, a man stepped out from behind a pine tree. Not Caleb, someone else, bigger, rougher, dressed in dark winter gear. He was in his mid-40s, tall with a heavy build, broad shoulders stretching the seams of his coat. His beard was thick and dark, ice forming on the hairs near his chin. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, but his eyes, narrow, dark brown, and sharp, held a hard, focused expression. The kind of expression that came from a man used to control. His nose had a deep crook as if broken multiple times. A faint scar curved along his neck and disappeared into his collar. He stood still, gloved hands at his sides, body squared. "Morning." His voice was deep, coarse, and strangely calm. "Looks like you've been busy." Ethan shifted his grip on the old man instinctively. Kaiser moved forward, placing himself between Ethan and the stranger. Growling low, the stranger took a small step closer. "Easy now, I'm not here to spook anybody." Ethan steadied himself. "Who are you?" The man's lips twitched in something too thin to be a smile. "Name's Ross Dalton." He nodded at the initials on the canteen inside Ethan's jacket, though he hadn't seen it. "I think you found something of mine." Ethan didn't reply. Ross continued, "I'm just trying to collect what belongs to me. And those two folks behind you?" He tilted his head. "They wandered somewhere they shouldn't have. My partner got jumpy, that's all." Ethan's voice hardened. "They were left to die." Ross shrugged, as if it didn't matter. "Storm makes people panic." Ethan knew the truth. Ross wasn't panicked. He was calculating. Ross took another step. "Hand them over. We'll pretend this morning never happened." Kaiser barked sharply, loud enough to echo across the ravine. Ross sighed, as if annoyed rather than intimidated. Didn't want to do this the hard way. Branches cracked behind Ethan. He didn't turn, but he felt movement, more footsteps coming from the trees above. A trap. Ross had waited here, knowing Caleb would push them in this direction. Ethan shifted the old man's weight and whispered urgently, "Run. Stay low." The old woman looked terrified but nodded. Ethan lowered the man gently behind a boulder and stepped forward, placing himself between the couple and Ross. Ross lifted one hand slowly, palm open. "Don't be stupid." Ethan didn't break eye contact. He spoke to Kaiser without looking down. "Guard!" Kaiser lunged, not at Ross, but toward the tree line behind them. A man tried to step out with a rifle, but Kaiser's sudden attack forced him back, giving Ethan precious seconds. Ethan grabbed the old woman's arm. "Move!" He helped the couple scramble behind the boulder, shielding them from the gunmen Kaiser had engaged. Snow exploded at Ethan's feet as another rifle shot cracked through the trees. Ross didn't shoot, but he charged forward, closing distance fast. Ethan sidestepped, grabbing Ross by the coat and forcing him into the snow, but Ross returned the blow with surprising strength. He swung a heavy fist, knuckles grazing Ethan's jaw. A second shot rang out. Snow sprayed near Ethan's boots. Kaiser snarled, forcing the rifleman back again. Ross grabbed Ethan's jacket collar. "You're making this worse." Ethan shoved him off with a hard kick and shouted, "Kaiser, go!" The dog dashed toward the couple, herding them toward the ravine's bend. The slope beyond it offered cover. Ross regained his footing, fury twisting his features. "You should have stayed out of this." Ethan didn't answer. He turned and sprinted after the couple as another shot cracked behind them. They reached the bend of the ravine, ducking behind a fallen tree. Snow collapsed off its branches as Ethan slid to the ground beside them. Kaiser stood in front, body trembling with tension but uninjured. Ethan took a breath, chest tight. They were alive, for now. Snow filled the ravine like drifting smoke, swirling in uneven gusts that made the air feel smaller with each passing second. Ethan positioned the elderly couple behind the fallen tree, keeping his body angled toward the direction Ross and the rifleman had appeared. His pulse hammered in the cold air. Kaiser stood at the edge of the makeshift shelter, chest expanding sharply with every tense breath. watching the ridge with unwavering focus. Ross Dalton's heavy tread still echoed faintly above them, followed by the crunch of a second set of footsteps, likely the rifleman, still shaken from Kaiser's sudden attack. They weren't advancing yet, but they were close enough to box Ethan's group in if he wasn't careful. Ethan whispered, "Stay low, don't move unless I say so." The old woman nodded shakily. Her husband tightened his grip on Ethan's sleeve. His face was lined with fear, but also something steadier. Determination, maybe, or disbelief that he had survived this long. Ethan scanned the terrain. The ravine curved sharply southwest. If they followed its bend, they might reach a thick band of trees where the terrain sloped downward toward the service road. If they could make it that far, the forest would give better cover. But moving the couple through knee-deep snow while being hunted was a different kind of challenge. "Kaiser," Ethan murmured, "find direction." The shepherd sniffed the air, then took 3 measured steps toward the left side of the ravine before glancing back. "This way." Ethan helped the woman stand. Her legs trembled, but she held onto Kaiser's collar tightly for support. He then braced the old man under one arm. They moved slowly, step by step, through the ravine's bend. Snow stirred above. Ethan froze. Kaiser stopped instantly. A low whistle rang across the ridge, 3 short bursts, spaced evenly. Ethan whispered, "They're signaling again." This time, the whistle wasn't a simple call. It carried a rhythm, intentional and confident. Ross was coordinating. Caleb was out there somewhere, likely circling ahead to cut them off. Ethan picked up the pace. The old woman breathed rapidly, her teeth chattering. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," Ethan said quietly, "but that doesn't mean they win." As they rounded the bend, a cluster of pines thickened the landscape. The trees here had grown close together, creating a narrow corridor shielded from the wind. They entered it, and the sudden hush felt like stepping into another world. But Kaiser suddenly stiffened, not at the front, but at the rear. Footsteps rushed toward them from the ravine behind. "Move," Ethan hissed. He pushed the couple forward. Kaiser turned and charged toward the sound, teeth bared, snow kicking beneath his paws. A tall man burst through the tree line, a new figure Ethan hadn't seen before. He wore a dark green jacket and had a long, unkempt brown beard that reached mid-chest. His face was narrow, with a pointed nose and sharp cheekbones. He carried a hunting knife in his right hand, gripping it with practiced familiarity. His eyes, gray, cold, focused, locked onto the couple with predatory precision. His voice cracked through the cold. "Stop right there!" Ethan didn't bother answering. He lunged, grabbing a thick branch half buried in the snow. As the bearded man swiped at Kaiser, Ethan swung the branch hard, striking the attacker's forearm. The knife flew from his grip and landed somewhere in the deep snow. Kaiser lunged, knocking the man backward. Snow exploded beneath them as the stranger tried to fend off the shepherd's weight. Kaiser's growl vibrated through the air, low and feral. Ethan shouted, "Kaiser, off!" Kaiser backed up instantly, disciplined despite the chaos. The stranger scrambled to stand, face twisted with anger. Ethan didn't wait for him to recover. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him against a pine tree. The man wheezed, gasping for breath. Ethan pinned him with an arm against his throat. "Who are you?" The man glared with dull fury. He had the look of someone who had spent years off the grid, weathered skin, thick calluses on his hands, boots patched with duct tape. A drifter, maybe, or someone who worked jobs no one proudly admitted. He rasped, "You shouldn't interfere." "Interfere with what?" Ethan tightened his hold. The man grinned despite choking for air. "Dalton wants the old man alive, but the woman, she doesn't matter." Cold anger slid through Ethan's chest. "What do you want with them?" The man coughed a laugh. "You're too late to—" A gunshot split the air. The tree trunk beside Ethan's head exploded in a spray of bark. Ethan ducked and pushed himself off the stranger. "Go!" he shouted at the couple. Kaiser ran to their side, herding them deeper into the tree corridor. Another shot rang out. The bearded man used the moment to scramble into the woods, disappearing between trees like a fleeing animal. Ethan didn't chase. He couldn't leave the couple exposed. He sprinted after Kaiser. The corridor of pines opened into a slope dotted with fallen logs. Beyond it lay the edge of the service road, barely visible beneath the fresh snow. They weren't safe, but they were close to a terrain advantage. A voice echoed from above the ravine. "Ross Dalton." "Ethan, you're making this a hell of a lot harder than it has to be." Ethan didn't turn around. Instead, he guided the couple over 2 fallen trees, moving fast but steady. The woman stumbled once. and Kaiser pressed against her again, keeping her upright. When they finally reached the roadbed, Ethan paused and looked both directions. Snow drifted thickly, obscuring most visibility, but the terrain sloped downward to the east, a long, twisting descent, a possible escape route. "Downhill," Ethan said. "Stay close." He helped the old man take the first steps onto the coal slope. The snow here was deeper, but the grade made it easier to move quickly. Kaiser trotted ahead, scanning both sides of the road like a well-trained scout. Halfway down the incline, the woman whispered, "Why are they doing this? We don't have anything." Ethan shook his head. "Something else is going on. They aren't trying to rob you. They're trying to remove witnesses." The old man winced with pain and clutched Ethan's arm. "We weren't supposed to see them. Taking something. They thought we were spying." "What did you see?" Ethan asked. The old man swallowed. "A crate. They were hiding it under a tarp. They didn't want us near it." Ethan's jaw tightened. Smugglers, or something worse. He hardly had time to think about it. Another whistle shot through the forest. Closer now. Kaiser growled. Ethan whispered, "Keep moving." They followed the road until it curved around a large embankment. As they turned the bend, a faint shape appeared ahead, a small ranger outpost sign partially buried in snow. A trail marker. That meant a junction with a rutted maintenance road lay just beyond. They could reach the lower valley if they kept moving, but the sound behind them grew louder, branches breaking, boots hitting snow, voices carrying through the trees. Ross and Caleb were catching up. Ethan guided the couple toward the junction. Kaiser ran ahead and barked once. A signal. Clear path. They stepped into the clearing where the two service roads met. The wind gusted harder here, whipping snow sideways. To the east, the valley dropped sharply. To the west, the service road flattened into thick tree line. Ethan chose east. He helped the couple down the slope, each step a painful gain. Just then, a rifle shot cracked from behind. Snow exploded inches from the old man's boots. Kaiser barked urgently. A second shot rang out. Ethan turned just enough to see Ross Dalton emerging from the tree line, gun raised, coat whipping in the wind. Caleb appeared to Ross's right, panting, his face twisted with frustration. Ross shouted, "Stop running, Ethan!" Ethan didn't stop. He pulled the couple behind a rock shelf as bullets tore through branches above them. Kaiser stayed in front, teeth bared, tail stiff with protective rage. Ethan adjusted his hold on the old man and whispered sharply, "We're getting out of this. Stay with me." The old man nodded, breath trembling. And together, with Kaiser leading them into the blinding white, they moved deeper down the valley slope, the gunmen's shouts fading behind them, but not disappearing. The hunt wasn't over. The wind howled down the valley like a long, ragged breath, sweeping the snow into shifting curtains that made it impossible to see more than 30 feet at a time. Ethan kept one arm supporting the old man while Kaiser stayed pressed against the woman's side, guiding her along the steep descent. The slope was narrow, flanked by jagged rocks and frost-coated pines. Every so often, Ethan glanced back. He couldn't see Ross or Caleb anymore, but he knew they were somewhere behind the swirl of white. The woman's breaths came heavy and uneven. I can't go much farther." "Yes, you can," Ethan said firmly. "It's downhill. Keep leaning on Kaiser. He won't let you fall." Kaiser gave a soft huff, as if confirming the promise. They reached a small ledge, a break in the terrain where the snow had settled in a shallow bowl between two large boulders. Ethan guided the couple to sit and catch their breath. He crouched low, peering through the pine line above them. Snow danced in all directions, blurring movement, masking sound. "We have a few minutes," he said quietly. The old man nodded, rubbing his trembling hands together. "They're hunting us." "Yeah," Ethan said, "but they're not tracking you for nothing. You said you saw a crate?" The man swallowed hard. "We weren't supposed to be near it. We only stopped because May," he glanced at his wife, "dropped her cane, rolled right near them." May stared blankly for a moment, her memory foggy, then her face tightened. "I remember a tarp, blue one. They were angry, very angry." "What was inside the crate?" Ethan asked. The old man's eyes flickered. "Didn't get to see, but the younger one, the twitchy one, he kept checking it. Ross told him not to let it out of sight, said it was worth more than both of us combined." That explained why Ross wasn't simply robbing or silencing them out of impulse. Something bigger was in play. Before Ethan could ask more, Kaiser stiffened, ears tilting toward the slope below, then toward the right. His body lowered into a defensive stance. Ethan followed Kaiser's gaze. The trees rustled unnaturally. Then a figure stepped through the snow. Not Ross, not Caleb, a new man. He was tall and wiry, maybe mid-50s, wearing a dark padded vest over a tactical fleece. His beard was peppered gray, trimmed close and sharp, framing a long, narrow jaw. His nose was crooked from an old break, and deep creases lined his forehead. His eyes, icy blue and sunken from years of hard living, moved with precise awareness. He carried a compact rifle strapped across his chest, his hand resting loosely on the grip. He didn't look surprised to see them, more like he'd expected to cross their path eventually. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but with a tone that suggested he rarely wasted words. "Weather's not doing you any favors." Ethan stepped in front of a seat. "Couple. You with Dalton?" The man shrugged one shoulder. "Depends who's asking. You didn't answer." He tilted his head, studying Ethan with a faint smirk. "You've got the look of someone who thinks he's buying time. You're not." His eyes flicked past Ethan toward the couple. "Old folks shouldn't be out here. Shame they wandered into the wrong business." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "We're leaving." "You're not," the man replied plainly. "Dalton wants the old man alive. The woman's not required. That makes your decision simple." Kaiser growled, deep and dangerous. The man lifted a brow. "Nice dog. Shame he'll get you killed." Ethan glanced at the terrain. The slope narrowed to the left, but opened to a drop on the right, too dangerous to risk. He had one choice: forward, toward the man now blocking the path. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, buying a few seconds more. The stranger didn't hesitate. "Name's Grant Foster." His expression didn't change. "Used to work private contracts before I met Dalton. Good pay, simple work, no questions." His smile was thin, forced. "This is one of those jobs." "Whatever's in that crate," Ethan said carefully, "doesn't involve these two. That crate involves whoever Dalton says it does." Foster glanced behind Ethan. "Step aside. I don't want to shoot you unless I have to." Ethan didn't move. In moments like this, silence could be louder than defiance. Grant Foster sighed as though disappointed. Then he lifted the rifle a few inches. Before he could aim, Kaiser lunged. The shepherd shot forward in a blur of muscle and snow. Foster jerked his rifle up, firing a wild shot that cracked into a boulder above Ethan's shoulder, spraying stone fragments. Kaiser slammed into Foster's side, knocking him knee-deep into the snow. The man stumbled, swinging the rifle desperately. Ethan seized the opening, charging to intercept. As Foster tried to level the barrel again, Ethan grabbed the rifle's forearm, yanking it upward. The weapon fired into the sky, the blast echoing across the valley. "Damn it!" Foster snarled, trying to wrench the rifle free. Ethan drove his shoulder into the man's chest. Foster staggered but recovered quickly, striking Ethan across the face with a gloved fist. Years of private contract work had toughened him. He fought with deliberate, brutal efficiency. Ethan countered with a knee to Foster's thigh. Foster grunted, shifting stance, then rammed Ethan backward into the snow. The rifle slipped from both their hands. Kaiser jumped again, clamping his teeth around Foster's arm. Foster roared from the pain and elbowed the dog repeatedly, but Kaiser didn't release. Ethan lunged forward, grabbing Foster by the collar and shoving him hard onto his back. Snow exploded beneath the impact. Breathing heavily, Foster's expression sharpened into cold fury. "You're in way over your head." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but I'm still standing." Foster reached for something beneath his vest, another weapon. Ethan reacted first. He grabbed a fistful of snow and crushed it into Foster's face. The man choked and twisted, blinded just long enough for Ethan to kick the side of his ribs and wrench the handgun from his grasp. Foster rolled away, gasping. He looked at Ethan, then at Kaiser, then at the couple. Then he made a decision. He scrambled to his feet and ran, vanishing between the trees as Kaiser barked after him. Ethan didn't chase. He knew Foster wasn't retreating. He was regrouping. He turned back to the couple quickly. The old woman trembled violently, the cold and fear taking a toll. The old man looked pale, but he was conscious, gripping Ethan's coat for stability. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked. The woman shook her head weakly. The man breathed hard. "No, just tired." Ethan wiped blood from his cheek. "We have to keep moving. They're not stopping." May whispered, "Why does he want us? We didn't do anything." Ethan knelt beside them. "You saw something you weren't supposed to. That's all it takes for men like them." The old man stared at the ground. "It's all because of that crate." "Whatever's in it must be important," Ethan said. "Worth killing for." He stood and looked down the valley. The slope ahead grew steeper, but it eventually leveled into the lower ridge. From there, the forest thickened, and a frozen creek cut across the land, a natural barrier that could slow down their pursuers. Ethan made a plan. "We follow the creek," he said. "It leads to the old ranger road. If we reach it, we can get to a larger trailhead." Kaiser waited for the signal. Ethan nodded. "Lead." The dogs sprinted forward, carving a path through the snow. As they descended the final stretch of the slope, Ethan heard something faint, an engine in the distance, muffled but unmistakable, echoing through the valley. His heart quickened. Someone out there was driving, not Dalton, not Caleb. Their group moved on foot, which meant there was someone else in the valley. Maybe a ranger, maybe a passerby, maybe help. But the man's last words stuck with Ethan. "Dalton wants the old man alive." Whoever was approaching might not be help at all. Ethan tightened his grip on the old man's arm. "Stay close," he whispered. "Whatever's coming next, we face it together." And with Kaiser leading them into the thickening storm, they moved toward the sound of the engine, toward danger or salvation, whichever reached them first. The sound of the engine drifted through the valley in uneven waves, sometimes clear, sometimes swallowed by the wind. Ethan paused on the slope, helping the elderly man keep his balance, while May rested a trembling hand on Kaiser's back. Snow thinned briefly, and Ethan scanned the clearing below. He couldn't see the source of the noise, but the direction was unmistakable, east, deeper into the valley where the frozen creek wound like a pale ribbon. Kaiser sniffed the air, muscles tense. Something about the engine unsettled him. His ears twitched forward, then flattened slightly, signaling uncertainty rather than excitement. Ethan steadied the woman. "We'll check it out, but slow. Could be help, could be something else." They worked their way downhill. The terrain flattened into a narrow shelf that overlooked the frozen creek. Branches cracked under accumulated frost, falling in soft thumps. Ahead, the snow was disturbed, tire tracks, fresh ones, cutting across the creek bed and continuing toward the thicker part of the forest. Ethan crouched to examine them. "Not a snowmobile," he murmured. "Too wide, maybe an ATV." The elderly man pressed a hand to his chest, breathing heavily. Do you think it's a ranger?" "Maybe," Ethan said, but he didn't believe it. Rangers rarely patrolled in storms like this, and the tracks were deep. Whoever drove the vehicle was carrying weight. Kaiser lifted his head suddenly and gave a sharp bark. A figure emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the creek. He wasn't Ross, he wasn't Caleb, and he wasn't Grant Foster. This man was shorter, maybe 5'9", but solid in build, the kind of compact strength earned through years of physical labor. His jacket was thick brown canvas, worn at the elbows, dusted with snow. A dark wool beanie covered most of his head, leaving only a stubbled G-line exposed. Square, sturdy, shadowed with a day's worth of growth. His cheeks were red from the cold, his lips cracked. He carried a small pack slung over one shoulder and held a metal crowbar in his right hand, not threateningly, but as if he always traveled with a tool in reach. His eyes were deep-set and brown, but sharp with awareness. He raised one hand cautiously. "Hold up. I'm not here to cause trouble." Ethan kept his position between the man and the couple. "Who are you?" "Name's Waylon Briggs," the man said, breath clouding the air. "I work freight at the supply yard down in Jackson Crossing. My ATV gave out half a mile back." Ethan studied him carefully. Waylon Briggs looked rough around the edges, but not dangerous, not like Ross or his men. His face carried worn grooves of someone who had lived hard but honest. He shifted uneasily, noticing Ethan's guarded posture. "Look, buddy, I'm just trying to get home. Saw some weird tracks near the ridge and decided to take a look. Wasn't expecting to walk into whatever this is." The old woman pressed closer to Ethan, whispering, "Do we trust him?" Waylon noticed her distress and lowered the crowbar, letting it hang loosely at his side. "Ma'am, I'm not here to scare you." He nodded toward her husband. "You folks all right? This storm's not kind to anybody." Kaiser stepped forward, sniffing the air around Waylon. His tail wasn't stiff, only cautious. That was a good sign. Ethan said firmly, "Stay where you are. You're not armed?" Waylon lifted his coat slightly, showing nothing but a utility belt with tools. "Only thing I shoot is rusted bolts." His tone was sincere enough to break some of the thick tension. Ethan lowered his guard just a fraction. "Why are you out here alone?" Waylon threw a thumb over his shoulder. "Yard's short-staffed. I volunteered to scout frozen cargo routes. Shouldn't have. Storm shut everything down quicker than expected. I lost my machine when the carburetor froze. His face tightened with frustration. Walked the rest of the way. Haven't seen another soul until now? Ethan didn't sense deception, but he had also learned that dangerous men could appear harmless. Waylon adjusted the strap of his pack. If you're running from someone, though, I saw figures up on the ridge. Didn't stick around to say hi. Ethan's pulse quickened. How many? 2, Waylon said. One tall, one wiry. They were arguing. Ross and Caleb. May shuddered visibly. Waylon noticed. Did they do something to you? They're coming for us, Ethan said. Long story. Not one I can tell standing in the open. Waylon looked around, then nodded toward the creek. I know a place. Old pump house near the base of Pine Hook Hill. Abandoned since '08. Solid concrete. No windows except a vent shaft. Ethan hesitated. A concrete pump house would be sturdier than the cabin. Better protection. Harder for bullets to punch through. And if Waylon really was a freight worker, he might know the valley's layout better than anyone. Can you get us there? Ethan asked. Waylon shrugged. It's a hike, but doable. Safer than staying on this slope. Ethan looked at Kaiser, silently asking the dog's instinct. Kaiser approached Waylon again, circled him, sniffed, then returned to Ethan's side without a growl. A good sign. All right, Ethan said. Lead the way, but we move slow. Waylon nodded. Understood. They started south along the frozen creek. Waylon walked ahead but kept a respectful distance, glancing back often. Ethan stayed behind him, walking with the couple and Kaiser. As they moved, Waylon tried to break the silence. You folks from around here? The old man managed a tired, Boise. Waylon nodded. Not the best weekend of vacation. It wasn't a vacation, May murmured, her voice wavering. We were visiting our son's memorial. Waylon's expression softened, and the lines around his eyes deepened. Sorry for your loss. The old woman smiled faintly, then coughed lightly. They continued along the creek for nearly 20 minutes before the storm shifted. The wind grew sharper, slicing across the valley with renewed force. Snow spun sideways, reducing visibility again. Waylon shielded his face. We're close. Pump house is just past that bend. But before they could reach it, Kaiser stopped. Not froze, stopped. His ears pricked forward, his muscles tensed. A warning. Ethan whispered, What is it? Kaiser turned sharply toward the right. Then Ethan heard it too. A single crack of a tree branch. Waylon's eyes widened. We're not alone. A voice echoed through the snow-filled air. Ross Dalton. You think you can hide down there, Ethan? Keep walking. I'll follow the footprints. Waylon mouthed silently. Who the hell is that? Ethan whispered back. The reason we have to move. Caleb's voice followed, closer. Tracks head toward the creek. They've got someone with them. Ethan felt the old man trembling beside him. May clutched his sleeve tighter. Waylon scanned the terrain quickly. Pump house isn't an option. They'll see us cross the open ground. Then what? Ethan demanded. Waylon pointed downstream. There's a snow cut under the creek bank. Narrow crawl space, but it'll hide you for a while. Ethan nodded. Show me. They hurried along the creek edge until Waylon dropped to one knee and brushed snow aside. Beneath the crusted layer lay a dark hollow, 2 feet high, 3 feet deep, a natural pocket carved by past thaws and frozen over. It's tight, Waylon warned, but hidden. Ethan helped May and her husband inside first. Kaiser crawled in after them, lying sideways to make room. Ethan turned to Waylon. Get in. Waylon shook his head. If 2 more people squeeze in, the snow roof could collapse. I'll double back and lead them away. Are you crazy? Ethan whispered fiercely. They're armed. Waylon smirked faintly. I've been dodging angry supervisors my whole life. These guys don't scare me any worse. His eyes hardened just enough to reveal a stubborn streak beneath the surface. Besides, they don't know I'm with you. Without waiting for argument, Waylon stood and covered the entrance with loose snow, leaving a thin air gap for breathing. Ethan hissed, Briggs, don't get killed. Waylon gave a crooked grin. Not planning on it. Then he jogged into the storm, deliberately stepping over fresh snow to draw attention. Moments later, Ross's voice boomed from the ridge. There! Someone's moving south, Caleb shouted. Go! He's alone! Footsteps thundered across the slope. Ethan crouched low inside the cramped hollow, Kaiser breathing warm air against his arm. The elderly couple huddled together, whispering soft prayers. Outside, the storm swallowed the sound of pursuit. But Ethan heard enough. Ross and Caleb were chasing Waylon Briggs into the storm, buying them precious time at the cost of his own safety. The hollow beneath the snow felt smaller with every passing second. Ethan crouched low, one arm wrapped protectively around the elderly man, while May clung to Kaiser's warm fur, her trembling easing only when the dog pressed closer. The cramped space muted the storm outside, turning the roaring wind into dull vibrations that hummed through the frozen earth. Snowflakes filtered through the thin entrance gap Waylon had left for airflow, drifting in slow spirals. Ethan's breath fogged inside the small cave, each exhale a reminder that they were still alive, but only because someone else had chosen to put himself in danger. He strained to listen. At first he could hear nothing but the storm. Then faint voices rose and fell somewhere far beyond the creek. Ross's deep shout carried through the valley. "He ran this way! Move!" Caleb's higher, sharper voice answered. "Tracks head south. He's limping." Waylon wasn't even armed. He had nothing but a crowbar and stubborn courage. Ethan cursed under his breath. May flinched slightly. He steadied her shoulder. "Sorry, just thinking," the old man whispered. "He didn't have to help us." "I know," Ethan said quietly. Kaiser's ears twitched. The shepherd stared toward the narrow entrance, every muscle attuned to movement. He wanted to run after Waylon, Ethan knew, but he wouldn't. Not without permission. Minutes passed. The storm drifted in and out of strength, but the voices gradually faded. Whether Ross and Caleb were chasing Waylon deeper into the valley or circling back, Ethan couldn't tell. They couldn't stay inside the hollow forever. The roof was frozen but fragile. Too much shifting, and it might collapse, and the air inside would grow thin. Ethan waited until the storm lulled, then whispered, "We need to move." May's voice trembled. "Are they gone?" "For now," Ethan said, "but we keep low and move fast." He helped her crawl out first. Kaiser slid out beside her, shaking off a layer of snow. The old man followed with difficulty, grunting softly as Ethan pulled him to his feet. When they were all out, Ethan checked the slope and creek line in both directions. Footprints were already filling with snow. The storm had nearly erased all trace of where Waylon ran. "Which way?" May whispered. Ethan pointed downstream. "We follow the creek. If we stay low, they'll have trouble spotting us." They walked single file, Kaiser taking the front, the couple in the middle, Ethan guarding the rear. The creek bed curved west, bordered by dense pine growth on one side and large boulders on the other. Shadows hung between the trees like curtains, and the air smelled of cold earth and juniper. The storm howled overhead, but softened near the creek, sheltered by the rock walls. After 20 minutes of careful progress, the creek widened into a shallow basin where snow had drifted into uneven waves. Kaiser paused here, sniffing at the ground, then trotted ahead with more confidence. The terrain was smoother, easier for the couple to walk. Ethan guided them over a ridge of ice. "Almost there." "Almost where?" the old man asked. "Anywhere but here," Ethan said. "We get distance first, answers later." May stopped suddenly, panting. "Wait, hear that?" Ethan listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, a faint noise carried across the basin. Not wind, not voices, a low mechanical hum. Kaiser's ears perked instantly. The engine again, but closer now. Ethan motioned for the couple to kneel behind a boulder, then crouched beside them. The hum grew louder, echoing between cliffs. Snow kicked up from the basin floor as a dark shape emerged through the white haze. Not Ross or Caleb, not Waylon's dead ATV. A larger vehicle, a four-wheel utility task vehicle with a metal roll cage and a front rack. The kind used by search and rescue units or forest workers. Its headlights cut through the storm, sweeping over the basin in wide arcs. Behind the wheel sat a woman, mid-30s maybe, dressed in a bright orange rescue jacket, hood up against the storm. Her face was partly covered, but Ethan could see focused dark eyes beneath the hood's brim. When the ATV slowed, she removed her goggles. She had olive-toned skin, sharp cheekbones, and a determined expression. Her black hair was braided tightly against her head. Snow collected in the braid, giving it a streaked look. Her hands were nimble and confident on the steering wheel, revealing experience rather than panic. Ethan stood slowly. "Rescue team?" She pointed a gloved finger at him. "You Ethan Cole?" Ethan froze. "How do you know my name?" The woman shut off the engine and stepped down, boots crunching heavily. "Name's Riley Hart, field officer with Idaho Emergency Response." She approached with purposeful strides. Her posture was strong, straight back, chin level, hands kept visible. Someone trained for crisis evaluation. She lifted a GPS unit strapped to her wrist. "We picked up a distress signal. Ping said a phone was active for 10 seconds around this valley. Belonged to you. Ethan frowned. My phone died hours ago. Riley nodded. Dead battery still pings when it tries to reconnect. Lucky for you. May stepped forward shakily. You're here to help? Riley softened. Yes, ma'am, that's the job. She looked at the couple closely. You two need heat and medical attention. Kaiser trotted over cautiously, sniffing Riley's boots. Riley smiled at him, kneeling to let him inspect her hand. Well, aren't you handsome? You trained? Ethan nodded. Search and rescue K9. Riley stood again. Good, I'll need him, but first... She scanned the tree line, expression tightening. There were 2 men following your tracks. 3, Ethan corrected. 1 ran ahead. Riley's jaw clenched. I saw 2 of them earlier. They tried to flag me down on the ridge. Lied about being lost hunters. Something felt off, so I didn't stop. Ethan felt a chill unrelated to the cold. They're dangerous. They've been tracking us since the ridge. Riley's voice dropped. What do they want? Ethan looked at the elderly couple. Something these 2 saw. Something in a crate. Riley stiffened. Crate? Smuggling operation, Ethan guessed. Or something worse. Riley exhaled sharply. Great. And here I thought today would be paperwork. She turned to her ATV and pulled a thermal blanket from the storage compartment. She wrapped it around May first, then her husband. I can take 1 passenger, she said. The ATV won't handle 4 adults, a dog, and a storm. Ethan shook his head. We stay together. Riley stared at him. You want these 2 walking the rest of the way? They'll freeze. Before Ethan answered, Kaiser growled sharply. Riley froze. Ethan saw it too. Footprints on the ridge above the basin, fresh ones, scattered but leading toward them. Ross Dalton's voice echoed across the cold air. There they are! Riley's eyes widened. Move! Ethan grabbed the old man. Riley grabbed May, and Kaiser sprinted ahead as bullets ripped through the snow. Riley ducked behind the ATV, shouting, They don't have good angle here. We head for the South Ridge. Show us! Ethan yelled. Riley fired up the ATV again, engine roaring back to life. Follow the left side of the creek. It'll shield you. They ran. Kaiser barked fiercely, guiding them down the narrow trail carved by wind. Riley drove beside them, matching their pace as much as she could in the deep snow. Behind them, Ross and Caleb descended aggressively, slipping and sliding, but refusing to stop. Gunshots echoed again, loud, sharp cracks bouncing between the cliffs. One bullet struck Riley's ATV roll cage, sparking off the metal. Riley cursed. They're shooting at rescue workers now? Perfect. Keeps getting better, Ethan muttered, breath heavy. The group reached a cluster of low boulders that opened into a natural depression shaped like a bowl. A small storm shelter sign barely peeked from under a sheet of ice. Riley shouted, Inside! Now! They climbed through the narrow entrance, a reinforced concrete hut built into the hillside, meant for emergencies exactly like this. Ethan guided the couple inside, while Riley parked the ATV across the opening for partial cover. Kaiser stood guard at the doorway, ears pinned forward. Inside the shelter, dim light filters through a small ventilation shaft. A metal bench sat along the wall, coated in frost but stable. Ethan helped the couple sit. Riley checked the vent. They can't shoot through this place. 1 entrance only. We can hold them off. They'll come, Ethan said. I know. Riley pulled out a flare gun and loaded it. And so will help. I sent coordinates the second I spotted you. Ethan exhaled, slowly. Good. May shivered in Ethan's arms. Will he be okay? Ethan didn't answer for a moment. We'll find him, he said softly. I promise. Outside, the storm rumbled again, and footsteps began to gather on the snow. When the snow finally settled, and the echoes of danger faded into the quiet of the valley, one truth remained. Sometimes God doesn't move mountains for us. He moves people. He sends us the right soul at the right moment. A stranger on the road, a rescuer with tired eyes, a loyal dog who never leaves our side, or a miracle hidden in the smallest flame that refuses to die. Life doesn't always give us clear paths or gentle weather. Some days feel like storms that will never end, storms of loneliness, pain, loss, or fear. But even in those moments, God's whisper can be found in unexpected places. In the courage of someone who chooses kindness over fear, in the strength you didn't know you still had, in the light that refuses to go out when the night feels too long. And maybe, the real miracle isn't the storm passing. The miracle is surviving long enough to see the sun rise again. It's discovering that Even in your weakest hour, heaven still places angels, ordinary, imperfect, human angels, on the roads you walk. So, tonight, wherever you are watching from, whatever storm you are facing, I pray that God surrounds you with people who lift you up, warm your spirit, and remind you that you are never walking alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story meant to light your way. May God bless you, your family, your home, and every moment ahead. And may His light, like the lantern in our story, burn gently in your heart, guiding you through every storm to come.